again for DEM in 20, episode 6. Are non-compliant devices dangerous? I'm joined with my co-host, Michael. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well. I know 2 weeks just flies by, so looking forward to jumping into another one of these episodes. And thank you, attendees, viewers, wherever you're watching this on demand. We really appreciate you keeping up. And as you may not be aware, at the top of this page, you can subscribe so you can always know when the next one is dropping. So really glad we're here and looking forward to talking about this with our guest today.
So our guest today is Rob Key. How are you doing, Rob?
Hey guys, thanks for having me back. Rob Key, I'm an SE here at 1E and glad to chat with you guys.
Good to have you. So non-compliant devices, are they dangerous? I know that, just talking on this topic from perhaps not a security point of view, I know that having my device being up to date is pretty important in the home for like updates and features. But I know as a user, I don't really care about patches and security issues. I don't think my network is that important. So when, IT are bothering me about getting my laptop updated, sometimes it can feel like a bit of a hassle. I'm like, come on, I'm working, what's going on? Like, what do you guys think? What's your experience with device compliance here?
Yeah, device compliance is always a big thing, right? So compliance stretches so many different things. And you mentioned patching and things like that. And that's something that user usually knows is coming. Hey, I'm going to get prompted a time or two a month that they're going to ask me for that information and so on. But compliance can go so much further. Maybe it's very specific to that organization. They could be looking at making sure certain software titles are not on there, making sure certain settings are set and so on. So it can get really in depth.
Okay, so you're actually talking about maybe enforcing specific rules for applications, because like Alex, I was probably thinking more along the lines of a compliant device is just a device that is up to date or current. But it can be so much more than that when it comes to how a device is used and what can be used as well.
Definitely. I think maybe think of it as this is how we want our devices to be. And sort of going back to that that previous DEM in 20 that I jumped on with you guys and looking at some of that change control compliance, making sure things stayed the same. This is sort of looking at more prevention or ensuring things like maybe if we're talking about virus definitions, maybe we're talking about those patches you're talking about, or a 0-day vulnerability. So lots of things could come across this compliance type of scenario.
So I know, Rob, you have something interesting to show us, but before we do that, shall we break down some concepts for our viewers? Shall we define what we define as a non-compliant device and what is dangerous?
Sure. So, I mean, non-compliant device, again, sort of goes back to this is how, as an organization, we want our devices to be. If they're non-compliant, that means that maybe they're out of that spec. We see more and more, a lot of my customers have BYOD plans, so bring your own device scenarios. And with those, in most of those, they have scenarios where they allow a client or something like that to be on the machine. So when we're talking about 1E, but if we're talking about Tachyon on those devices, that allows us to have visibility onto those devices right away. Ensure that a person who's using their computer at home, maybe their kids on Netflix or whatever other application, doesn't get something on that machine that pushes it out of compliance. So as soon as they come back to the office or they log in remotely, we can do a quick series of checks and make sure that that device is how we want it to be.
Yeah, great definition. I think that definitely clears up from a non-compliancy issue, and I think danger is definitely it's through from the perspective of whoever is managing it. From a user's point of view, like we introduced, maybe not such a big deal. Maybe my laptop doesn't. I need to update it for a couple of hours because it was dangerous. But from an IT perspective, I mean, talk to any IT admin, and they'll talk about the nightmares of BYOB without software to help you manage it, right?
Definitely.
Okay, cool. So should we how much time we got left, Michael? The clock is running, Rob. Part of the show you're familiar. Welcome back.
Got 15 minutes. So
always on the clock. Let me share my screen for you guys real quick, and we'll just show you a few things. How about that? All right, guys. So we're talking about different compliance scenarios. One of those was around vulnerable software. So that's something that we can do with the Tachyon Explorer, which I'm showing on my screen right now. We can query those devices, gather data right away. So if I wanted to go out and look at list installed software, so I'm just going to grab this from all my machines. So if I'm an engineer, I'm looking for how is this affecting the broad environment. One thing that comes up a lot of times with our customers is Mozilla Firefox. So if I wanted to just say, let's look for Mozilla only, we could sort that down very fast. So just like that, I've grabbed all of my machines, queried those devices for a certain software title, gathered that information. Now it's fantastic finding information in the environment, but let's take an action on that. And that's where a lot of other products in the environment have a challenge, whether it's from actually taking action in the same system, or this next step, which I'm going to look at actually quarantining this device. I'm going to go to PC03 and I'm going to do a follow-up action. So because it has this, maybe I pushed this out with the configuration manager. I didn't get all of my machines because of a issue with a CM client, that kind of thing. So now we need to close that gap. We've still got that vulnerability out there, whether it's 10%, 5%, what have you. We can actually grab all of that data and then we can quarantine those devices and request to fix those devices. So I'm going to quarantine based on compliance requirements. This is more of a reactive scenario, right? So we know what we're looking for. We found it in the environment. And now we're going to go out, we're going to quarantine these devices. We can even plug in that fix into this instruction. So if we wanted to say, hey, we're going to quarantine it, we're going to prompt the user that device is quarantined, and then we're going to remove or give them an option to remove Firefox from the machine and maybe let them know why. Maybe this is not an approved browser, that kind of scenario. Does that make sense, Michael?
It does, because I was just trying to think of an instance of where you would need to quarantine and why. So the fact that you can do that and be able to show that, maybe because most users don't really even know that they have to have their device be quarantined for whatever reason. So if we've got the ability to from the engineer side, search for that and then provide a remedial action, there's then a way that, of course, the user will be informed that their device has been quarantined, correct? Is that
right? And we can do that here. Yeah, so there's other products out there that sort of look for the scenario, and you can see right now I can get to the internet, move around on this device. I could get to other shares, things like that. So I just wanted to show that we actually have a connection right this minute. But if I go back to here, comparing what we're getting ready to do to others in the market, you either have that query and find information, you have that possibility of even maybe going a step further of looking for certain non-compliance, but then they sort of leave the user to figure out what's going on, or maybe wait for a service desk scenario, which we could do that as well. But we also want to give options where possible to say, hey, you're out of compliance, let's fix that and then get you back into compliance. So I've got this instruction. I'm just going to quarantine based on those compliance requirements that maybe my organization has set. So if I go and put my password in, because it is in action, and I can do an approval on here if I prefer to do so. Now we'll see right away, I have no internet access. If I go over here, try to do this web page again, it's going to say no internet. So we've been quarantined, and we've got an option to prompt the user here where it says your device is not compliant, and we could put whatever description in there. So it's very versatile as far as how we make this look. Now we could reset critical services and release. We could log a service desk ticket. Maybe they're not really sure even with the description what to do. So I'm just going to reset these critical services. I'm going to hit submit.
Sorry to interrupt. I love from a user's perspective that rather than just showing them an error message and kind of leaving them to connect the dots, that there's an actionable a button press that you can go on and decide what you want to do from that. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, definitely a great feature. And again, you can change that. And you saw the automatic refresh there on the screen. You see a remove from quarantine prompt as well. So we can go pretty far with this. That was, again, the reactive type of thought. But would you guys like to see sort of how we could even do that proactively, or at least sort of describe and show you what a policy would look like to do this as the machine reboots to look for certain things?
That sounds great.
Perfect. So if we go over and look at what we call guaranteed state here at 1E, we're looking for certain scenarios to determine whether a device is how we want it in this case. So I've got policies that are filled with different rules, and I just made some various ones that I thought pertain to things we wanted to prompt the user for. So you can see my device compliance. It's a user notification. I've got a description here of how that's going, what that does, that we're going to quarantine it, prompt the user, and so on. And then a few things, and this is not exclusive to these. These are things that I thought, in my experience and my peers, determined, hey, these are things that you might prompt the user for. So BitLocker, or if there's any kind of reboot compliance, that kind of thing. Maybe even Defender updates. So we want to make sure that Defender is up to date, or whatever virus protection you're using, that kind of thing. And we can scope that in on any type of virus product. So if we wanted to take that a step further, so there are things here, you know, the question might be, do we look at what if we don't want to prompt the user? We could definitely do that as well, right? So we have a lot of customers that are looking for certain services on different things like that, that really we don't see any need to engage the user. But this will actually look at anytime certain things change on the device, at the restart, at a screen unlock. It's going to check all of these things very, very fast. And if there is a non-compliant, it'll pop up. Of course, we're not going to put things in there that are going to frequently be non-compliant, because we don't want to quarantine our users constantly in that scenario. Does that make sense with regards to how we could do that?
Yeah, it does. In fact, I was thinking, you mentioned about how fast this can be done, and you talked about how fast we can gather this information and pull it from endpoints. And a colleague of ours, Jason, was sharing on a webinar recently the way he thinks of speed and how fast this is in hummingbird flaps. So he's watching Discovery Channel or something, and one hummingbird flap, not even a rotation, just one movement of down, then up, is 12th of a millisecond. But apparently Tachyon is able to pull that request and search that endpoint and grab this information in a fourth of that time. So 3 to 4 milliseconds, we're able to get this information, excuse me, and whether that's remediate, apply that fix, or of course quarantine, and then apply the fix after the screen's gone.
Definitely.
Just
to give, I can give you sort of a little bit of an example. This is a bit of those rules that we were looking at. So if I wanted to do that check part, so let me open up the check portion of what we call a fragment, as you see on my screen there. But it's more or less small bits of code, and these are things that you can write as a customer. These are things that we frequently assist our customers with, and then we have a team that is specific to just writing requests and things that we see in the market. You guys did the DEM IN 20 on Print Nightmare. So that's one that I believe we just released a policy around looking for those certain attributes and making sure that devices were compliant from that perspective. So I've got this one here. It's just looking for if certain software is installed, if there's a reboot pending. Just to talk about speed, I'm going to just ask the device if it has that. So if I run that, you see right away, it took 391 milliseconds, and I believe that's even a fraction of that. So 356 bytes that it pulled that information that's able to tell us, hey, this passed and this did not. Now you wouldn't see this as a engineer unless you're in here building these, but you do the check, and then right away we can turn around and do the fix to where you can run the same thing. This is going to look and do the fix, and you see that it threw our machine into quarantine. Now, I could add on a prompt to this as well. So there's lots of areas we could go with this type of scenario, but that was just, you were talking about speed. So I wanted to make sure to just show you how fast we could check for something or kick it into quarantine.
So obviously this is a limited demo for the viewers. I wanted to know, we're talking speed. Does this speed scale? Could, let's say I'm IBM, I've got 600,000 devices and I need 10,000 quarantined right now. How does that impact the speed?
Yeah, 100%. So we're direct to the endpoint. So we're not doing any kind of peer-to-peer in this scenario. So we're going directly to the endpoint and directly back. When we're talking about milliseconds, we can even stagger that if it's slightly bigger, if we have a payload or something like that. But we can send that query or instruction to an endpoint and it brings it right back. So we're doing that. If we're talking about 600,000, it's hard to give you a guesstimate on time, but we're still talking about seconds or into low minutes for reviewing all of those devices, bringing all that back, probably still in the seconds from the review perspective, and then quarantine just a slight bit longer. So the speed and the fraction of speed that it takes to do this compared to traditional methods is just amazing. It amazes our customers every time I talk to them. If they need data right away and they need to take action like this quarantine process, it's something we can do with no issue.
That's pretty mind-blowing. So I obviously, both of you know this, but I'm a product manager in the sort of patch world, and to get anything in seconds or minutes is it's pretty insane. And the fact that it scales also, really incredible. Michael, how are we doing for time?
Yeah, we're doing well. Just a few more minutes. And Rob, I'm going to throw you a bit of a curveball here. The Colonial Pipeline hack that happened in the US, they got control of a password and they used that password to get into the different network infrastructure systems to kind of put the pipeline on hold while all those systems were corrupted. Quarantine, could that be used in this example? If something, would they flag that this password has been validated, not validated, but has become vulnerable? And then would you then use that to identify devices that use the sort of admin permissions, or is that not applicable at all in this example?
No, I think it definitely could be, right? So we'd have to work through that process and determine what's identifying that, or as like I said, as a reactive possibility. We know this, we can maybe determine that from Explorer to determine what we have on what devices, that scenario, and then we quarantine all of those devices for security sake, right? We quarantine, then we have that connection. The great thing about 1E's quarantine is we have a connection from Tachyon server to those endpoints. So if that means that we have to make a certain change to the endpoint, we can make that change and then unquarantine. I mean, I remember my days back I actually worked for one of our customers many years ago, that when a device had any kind of malware whatsoever, any kind of vulnerability, we went and grabbed that machine off the desk, and I really made some people mad. So this is a much better scenario, right? So where you can quarantine that, address it right away, have access from an engineer level or even from a security administrator level, you could get to those endpoints, make changes, verify that those vulnerabilities were taken care of, and then unquarantine the device.
It sounds like it's the best of both worlds that we were talking from the beginning, right? From my perspective as a user, I want to know what's going on. I want to get back to work as quickly as possible. And from from the compliance point of view, I want to make sure my devices are secure, that they're, that software that isn't allowed to be running isn't running. So usually you have to sort of pick one. It sounds like there's no picking necessary here.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. As a user, I think it almost establishes a sense of like confidence in using your machine, in the sense that maybe you can download something, because sometimes you don't know if it's really sketchy or not. Or it might, whenever you look to download a file and then like 3 different URLs pop up and it's like, which one do I download? It's nice to know that if you do download something that you shouldn't have, maybe because there's something underneath it, there is something that maybe refreshes or runs as soon as you unlock your computer or turn it back on. It's going to catch that, all being well, if those policies have been put in place.
Reminds me of DEM IN 20 episode 1, download more RAM. Is that safe? Is that not?
Yeah, for those slow computers, right? Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Rob, really appreciate you coming back and joining us for another round on DEM in 20. It's been really insightful. And we hope that we can see you again next season, which will probably be 2022 for yourself, as we have a rota of volunteers to get through. So we really appreciate you being here with us today.
Sounds good. Yeah, it's always a pleasure, guys. Appreciate you having me, and it's always a joy to speak with you.
And I know the audience really loved it as well. So thank you so much. Episode 7, make sure you join us, guys. We're on demand now, so you can catch us in DEM in 20, episode 7 with Jason Ciccoloni. It's been a pleasure. I'm Alex. It's been Michael and Rob. DEM in 20. Catch you next time.